Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson along with our house DJ Tolliver. And Tolliver, we have some new listeners this week.
Yeah, welcome to the listeners of NHPR, New Hampshire Public Radio, all across the Granite State, from Colebrook to Nashua.
All the way to
I did
Nashua.
Have to look up that pronunciation.
No, you should know that one. And of course, it's a very important state every 4 years in the primary process in terms of picking who the presidential nominees will be. In fact, New Hampshire was very important to President Trump's campaign the first time when he won the primary back in 2016 and told voters he'd fix the state's drug problems by tightening the border.
We're going to have strong, incredible borders, and people are going to come into our country, but they're going to come into our country legally. They're going to come in legally.
So that last part is our focus this hour. People who are coming into the United States legally. About 2.6 million people did so in 2022, far outpacing unauthorized entries, and more than 800,000 immigrants became U.S. citizens last year. But we know that process is slow and inefficient. So what can be done to improve legal immigration in this country? That's our question. We want to hear from you at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. We will get to that in just a moment. But first, last week, we asked you whether or not America is over-medicated. Here are some of the comments we got after the show.
Hi, my name is Susie, calling from Denver, Colorado. As a very fortunate, very healthy 61-year-old, I think that there are a lot of Americans that are just looking for a quick fix, that don't want to put in the work and have a healthier lifestyle.
My name is Jonathan Carroll. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I was diagnosed with ADHD. My mother refused to give me medication. I suffered greatly from it. I failed out of school. I felt I was stupid. I had nothing but issues. I was later re-diagnosed when I was older and am now on medication and feel like I can actually do things again.
Hello, my name is Deborah. I'm calling from Clearwater, Florida. Every single person has a combination of their own unique genetics, so there's a virtual infinite range of whether or not we need medication.
Well, thanks to everyone who called in. You can hear that entire episode on our podcast in partnership with iHeart Podcasts on the iHeart app or wherever you listen to podcasts. So now to our topic this hour. What can we do to improve legal immigration? Tolliver, the phone number, please.
It's 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can write to us at listentothemiddle.com. You can also comment on our live stream on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitch. Reach out. I'm manning all the social media, okay? Let's get you on air.
All of them. Let's meet our panel. Zeke Hernandez is a professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. His book is called The Truth About Immigration. Zeke Hernandez, welcome to The Middle.
Thanks so much for having me on.
And Alicia Caldwell joins us as well. She covers immigration for Bloomberg. Alicia, welcome to you.
Appreciate it.
So before we go to the phones, Alicia, just set the stage for us. How difficult is it for someone right now in 2025 to get a visa, a green card, or U.S. citizenship?
Incredibly. When you start with a visa, there's narrow categories. There's lots of categories, but they're somewhat narrow, right? So if you are, say, a high-skilled worker, there's only 65,000 H-1B visas, and they're issued by lottery. So if a company hires you and you are overseas in whichever country you pick, right, you have a real long shot that your company is going to be selected and that you will be the person that they hire for that job. Even if you've gone to school here, obviously there's paths for training in the United States once you've gone to school here and you've graduated with a U.S. degree or a graduate degree. But the days of, staple a green card to the diploma are over. I mean, it never really existed, but even that push has long since passed. There's a push and pull over whether or not the 65,000 cap should be expanded or shrunk. Industry would tell you it needs to be expanded and refined. Again, it's a lottery system at this point. So everybody enters, every business enters that wants to sponsor an employee, and then the winners are just that. They're winners. Some, bigger than others, but it's incredibly difficult. And once you're here, your process is really long depending on where you're from. If you're from India, you may never get a green card. The line is just
so many people from India that want to. But Zeke Hernandez, when you look at the numbers overall, around 50 million people in the U.S. are foreign-born immigrants. That is way higher than the next highest, which is Germany, around 16 million. We've been bringing in a lot more immigrants than other countries. What is wrong, in your view, with our legal immigration system?
Well, where to even start, right? But I think one place to start is the last time we updated that system in terms of the number and types of visas we allow was 1990, right? So it's been 35 years, right? Our economy is different. It's more than twice as large as it was back then. Our demographic profile is very different. And so if you look right now, immigrants are just above 14% of our population, which is, if you look at the long arc of American history, that's just about normal, right? It's what it was about 100 years ago. But back then, our demographic profile was very different, right? And so we don't issue enough visas, enough legal visas, right? So Alicia gave the example of the H-1B. If you look at our green card system, we've been issuing 1 million green cards a year since 1990, but we need a lot more of them given our demographic profile and the size of our economy, the variety of our economy. The other thing that's wrong is that we really have only 2 or 3 major pathways to entry, right? More than 2/3 of our green cards go to family reunification immigrants, people rejoining their families. Only 140,000 are green cards sponsored by an employer, right? I mean, the state of Pennsylvania, where I live alone, could use all of those every year, right? Of those 140,000, only 5,000 go to people without a college degree who do essential work in, all kinds of industries. And so the system is so decrepit, so out of date, and so much smaller than it needs to be that, that's why you get these like incredibly long lines that Alicia referred to. So we got to make it bigger and more varied.
And Alicia, what are the politics of it right now? Does the Trump administration want to make it easier for people to come in legally, whether they are working in high-skilled jobs or in agriculture, for that matter?
Sort of is the short answer. The longer answer is it's complicated. Elon Musk wants a ton more H-1B visas. Other folks don't. And so there's this opposition and this conflict of how do you expand the market share for foreign workers? Most people agree we need more foreign labor. As Zeke said, the foreign-born population in the US is only about 14%, and it's been static for, I think, close to 100 years. So you're not really growing at that, but what you're seeing is an expansion of arrivals, or you had in the last several years. Now, those folks are, by and large, coming across the border illegally, but then sort of sitting into a gray area, right? They're asylum seekers. They secured TPS after their arrival. They were humanitarian parole. Those folks get work permits often. Sometimes it takes a long time if you're, depending on your circumstances. But in 2022, for instance, new arrivals accounted for 1.1 million new work authorizations. So those are people at every level of the economy, from agriculture, but you don't need a visa in that case, right? So that's sort of a built-in faucet of people, if you will. That faucet, that spigot has turned off entirely. So right now you have almost no illegal migration into the United States, which is the president's goal. There were only about 7,000 arrests at the southwest border in March. He wants 0. But what that also means is you don't have any new labor coming in. And those other legal pathways are narrowing dramatically. We're seeing, for instance, green card holders and visa holders being taken into immigration custody, their visas revoked, student visas in particular, a couple of green card holders, either based on their activity that the government has deemed, incompatible with the United States foreign policy or other approaches. But we're seeing that crackdown sort of expansively moving, right? So all the legal pathways that were there as well, narrowing.
Right. And Zeke, I guess the people that Alicia is talking about who would say we don't need to make this a smoother process would be people like Steve Bannon, who would say any worker that's coming in is taking away a job from an American worker. You argue in your book that that is not the case at all.
Yeah, and it's not just me making the argument. If you look at the empirical evidence, you look at the good peer-reviewed evidence, that is very, very apparent. Okay, immigrants do not take jobs from native workers, whether skilled or unskilled. There's a lot of reasons for that, but the simplest way I can put it is as follows. When you look at the economic evidence, immigrants bring 5 critical inputs into the economy. They bring their talent or labor, they bring investment, they bring innovation, they consume goods and services, and they pay taxes, right? These are critical inputs for economic growth that make the economic pie bigger and more diversified, which means that there's more jobs for everyone to go around, right? Immigrants would only take away jobs from natives if all they did was arrive and take jobs, but not bring any of the other four things that I talked about, because then the economic pie would stay fixed. But that's not what happens, right? Which is why at the local level, you talk to any mayor, governor, or chamber of commerce, the number one thing that they're desperate for are workers, and our only source of new workers is really immigration, right? Pretty much all the growth in new workers in this economy in the last several years has come from immigration. It has not come from natural growth because we're not having any. So that claim is simply incorrect. It's empirically, verifiably incorrect.
And yet it's even made it to South Park where they're saying, they took our jobs. It's like a line.
Yeah,
you're saying that's wrong.
Yeah. And I also, if you wouldn't mind just giving me 30 seconds to add something to what Alicia said, is that I think often we make the mistake of separating the legal immigration system from what's happening with the undocumented or illegal system. The truth is that the only solution to reduce the undocumented immigrant population is to make more legal pathways available. Those are perfect substitutes, right? Why do we have so much undocumented immigration? Because paths don't exist or are so outrageously long that our economy ends up filling them by accepting undocumented workers.
Tolliver, Alicia mentioned the lottery system for the H-1B visa. And of course, people that are in that lottery would have a 75% chance of being rejected.
Wow. And during the presidential campaign, President Trump went on the All In podcast and said he wanted to change that.
What I want to do and what I will do is you graduate from a college, I think you should get automatically as part of your diploma a green card to be able to stay in this country. And that includes junior colleges too. Anybody graduates from a college, you go in there for 2 years or 4 years. If you graduate or you get a doctorate degree from a college, you should be able to stay in this country.
Important to note that Trump said in that interview, Tolliver, that he wanted that to start on day one of his presidency. It has not happened
year 2.
yet.
Yeah, day one of year 2. This is Wayne Snow with All For You. So he's a Nigerian-born jazz singer who immigrated to Berlin. And, Berlin is famously a city where American jazz musicians immigrated after World War II. Okay, so it's a circle of life. More of your calls coming up on The Middle.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, and philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking you, how can we improve legal immigration? Tolliver, what is the number to call in?
It's 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com or on social media.
I'm joined by Bloomberg immigration reporter Alicia Caldwell and University of Pennsylvania professor Zeke Hernandez. And the phones are lighting up, so let's go to Barakat in Atlanta, Georgia. Barakat, welcome to The Middle. What do you think?
Well, I think, the lottery system is really great, but I think that needs even to be more streamlined in my view. I think there's a lot of randomness in it. And with that, what I mean is I think you could really enhance that by really allowing to see closer to the HR visa where you really look at the academics of the people that are coming into this country. I think they eventually end up becoming true job creators, drivers of industry, and I think that has to be looked from that perspective when you give immigration rights to people. So that way, really, the return on investment is huge for the country as a whole and for the individual that might otherwise not have had that opportunity in a country that is oppressing them. So I think it'd be win-win in that way. So, I mean,
have you yourself, really Barakat, gone through the immigration system in this country?
Yeah, I did. I was lucky enough to come in with my father, right? So he was a self-starter, had his own business in Africa, and at the time he wasn't able to be able to grow as much as he wanted. There was a lot of extreme policy and this was more in Ethiopia and Eritrea. There was a lot of civil war. So the only way he could move was to leave the country, and he left, and eventually we all came into this country. But I'm saying that I think eventually all of us, even if you were to look myself or my brother, we've done well. We went to school here, and we've gone through the academics rigor that normally that one used to do. Yeah. And we all make more than, 6 figures income, each one of us. So we basically contributed to the country. And I don't necessarily think we're taking jobs from the country. I think our contribution is probably more to the country that we are serving as our own country right now, which is the U.S. And I really, truly believe this is my country right now, in my view.
Barakat, thank you very much for that. Zeke Hernandez, your thoughts on that personal story.
Yeah, I mean, that's the story of immigrants of all classes, right? And they don't, they definitely come and they contribute all of these things. I think one part of the story that I think it's Barakat's story illustrates is that actually the children of immigrants do very, very well in this country, right? They earn very well. That means they're paying taxes. That means that, many of them are starting businesses at very high rates. And so I think Barakat's story is a story of immigrants of all types throughout all U.S. history. There's nothing to fear there.
Alicia, we were recently in Denver and did a podcast about how deportations are playing out there. And one of the things we heard is that people who are here legally are worried that they're going to be caught up in a raid and deported. And we just heard the story the other day of the man in Maryland who was here legally, who the Trump administration says was accidentally deported to that prison in El Salvador. How is the crackdown on illegal immigrants affecting people in this country who are following the laws?
So that's where it gets complicated because nobody quite knows who may be of target. Because again, once you've arrived and the U.S. government has said, hey, we understand you're here. They've processed you. They've opted in many cases over the last several years to release people and say, hey, come back to court at a different date. We can't detain you. We don't have the space and so on. And so now you're in legal limbo. You're not here legally, but you're definitely not here illegally. And as I said, most of those folks have a legal process underway. They're going to court. They'll get a work permit if they've applied for asylum or some other benefit, if temporary protected status or what have you. And historically, those processes do protect a migrant from removal. That process needs to play out, be it in the immigration court or through the temporary protected status program. There's an effort to get rid of all of that. Temporary protected status is threatened to be canceled, at least from several countries, including Venezuela. A federal court has blocked that for now, but the administration has made clear they have no intention, if they're allowed, to renew that process or to renew those protections. For those in the immigration court system, we don't know what's going to happen. So, I've been speaking to people all over the country, just spoke to a Venezuelan family that sort of fits all of these puzzle pieces, right? They have TPS for some of the family. They're all applying for asylum. They're from Venezuela, which is a primary target country right now. So they're genuinely concerned sort of on a daily basis as they go to work with their work permits. And will they be arrested at some point? They don't know. We don't know, frankly, because the administration is fanning out and their philosophy is anybody in the country without authorization, without a visa, without a sort of permanency or semi-permanency is sort of fair game. That's to be determined in the courts as to what authorizes status and so on. But we're seeing that expansion. So people at every level of the immigration system are worried. I've talked to green card holders who are concerned about leaving the country. One friend said, we're not going to go to Italy this summer because we just don't know what's next on the horizon. So we'd rather just stay domestic. So you're seeing some of that calculus change and decision-making change at, again, every level of the immigration system.
Let's get to another call. Dan is in Kansas City, Missouri. Dan, how could we improve the legal immigration system in your view?
Good evening. In my view, the best improvement for right now would be a complete across-the-board immigration moratorium. From all parts of the world, both of the guests have been emphasizing the need for industry to have cheap labor and the economic benefits of immigration, which is important, but man does not live by bread alone. We need to make sure that we have a strong social fabric, a cohesive national identity, and a sense of shared values and destiny. And we've absorbed a lot of foreigners over the last 5 years, 20 years, 30 years. And I think that we really need to kind of digest that. And I mean, Japan, for example, has a very restrictive immigration system. They're aging and their GDP is lower, and they could change that by importing, millions of foreign people, but then it wouldn't be Japanese Japan anymore. So I think that, economic considerations aside, there are intangible things that are more important than money.
And okay, that interesting point, Dan. Thank you very much for that. Zeke, your response to Dan there. There are obviously a lot of people in this country who agree with what Dan just had to say there.
Yeah, I've heard that point many times. Dan, thanks for calling in. Look, I don't know much about you, Dan, and I'm going to assume that your ancestors were immigrant at some point in the past. And it's interesting because 100 years ago, the same argument was made for closing the borders to Italians, Southern and Eastern Europeans, Asians, immigrants who were, the Irish, right? So every wave of immigration raises that same concern of, we need to make sure that we stay socially cohesive, that we preserve what is essential about American identity. Um, and the same concerns are being expressed today. And some people believe that somehow the immigrants of the past assimilated better than the immigrants today. What I can tell Dan is that when you look at the evidence, the immigrants right now are assimilating at the exact same rate and just as successfully as Dan's ancestors. And they do very well in adopting American values, American culture. There is, from the empirical evidence, we don't have cohesion problems, right? Immigrants do very well. They're very patriotic. They love the Constitution. They adopt political values that are very similar to whatever community they settle in. So, immigrants, of course, bring new things, but the evidence doesn't support that concern. And I would say what's interesting about the example of Japan that Dan gave is that Japan is desperately trying to implement an immigration system for the very reasons that it is really, really struggling. And that's true of South Korea and many other so-called cohesive or homogenous countries. So I understand the concern.
Japan has had a lot of financial woes for a long time, in large part because of the population decline that's going on there. Tolliver, what is coming in online?
So this is Charles. Okay, he wrote 6 paragraphs. I'm gonna put it in one sentence. It's too expensive for American parents who have a child overseas to make that child a citizen. Daniel from San Simeon says an immigrant is taking our jobs. His name is Elon. Leslie from Minnesota. Leslie from the great state of Minnesota says advocates for more immigration assume that the U.S. should embrace unlimited population growth. Ecosystems cannot support unlimited population growth. I'm kind of curious what you all think about that. Is there sort of like a limit where where resources get too thin or no?
Alicia?
So that's an interesting question. I haven't met anybody in my 20 years of covering the border and immigration writ large in the U.S. who says, everybody and anybody, let's just sort of free for all. Now, we did have a free for all. I'm not specifically of immigrant stock, if you will, but my family came over, in the early 1900s when there was no process. Literally, great granddad got on a boat with his brother, that sort of thing. So that has changed obviously dramatically over the last century. And again, I've not met anybody who says, anybody and everybody. There are processes. And, one of the hangups that many administrations have faced, particularly since the middle of the Obama administration, is this appeal for asylum. And the law is currently, notwithstanding some regulation changes, however one gets to the United States, they can ask for asylum. There's one exception to that. And that's if you've come from Canada and you are not a Canadian national, or you go from the US to Canada and you're not a US national, you have to ask for asylum in the first country you were in, meaning Canada or the United States. That's the only third safe country agreement the US has. But otherwise, anyone who gets to the United States under whatever means they got here, they're allowed to ask for asylum. Now, there's been some
even now in the Trump administration, you can still do that.
Well, no, because there was a policy change under President Biden. There was, legislation to codify this. It had bipartisan support. President Trump said he didn't like it ultimately, and so the bill failed. So President Biden implemented a policy change and said no one who comes, or generally speaking, no one who comes between ports of entry, crosses the border illegally, is going to be considered eligible for asylum. So they created a path, go to the ports of entry. Now, it's interesting hearing the Trump administration shut that off as well. They've closed access to ports, because I covered the Trump administration in their first tour of the White House, and they were very specific to say, go to the port of entry if you would like to seek asylum. They deemed that the legal path to do so. Right. And so you've got all these different avenues, but the law is that you can apply for asylum. The rule administratively is that you can't. So right now, no one generally speaking, is allowed to ask for asylum in the United States, either at the border or in advance. The refugee program, which effectively, think of it as a parallel to asylum, but you're invited as opposed to you show up. That is also shut down for now. So any path one had for asylum is now shut down, and we're seeing a result of that. 7,000 apprehensions in a month. That's never happened that anyone can remember.
Asylum, a big part of the legal immigration system. Let's go to Justin, who's in Denver, Colorado. Hi, Justin. Welcome to The Middle. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for covering this topic. It's great to hear. I've been to Kenya a few times, and they easily issued me a tourist visa, but I cannot get even a tourist visa for my close friend who's Kenyan who wants to come visit the States. And we've also found that you can't get a work visa unless you're from certain countries, and that pretty much excludes the entire continent of Africa. So my proposal to improve it, as I've said, well, let's put an ankle monitor on anybody who wants to visit our country, make it easier for them to visit, but they're so afraid that they may immigrate. And maybe that's a silly idea, but it was very, very rude process it was like a 2-year process to get an interview for a tourist visa, and he was denied. I said, well, then why don't we just treat everyone like a criminal and have an ankle monitor on them, and that way we can ensure that they don't stay. So, thank you all very much.
Interesting. Thank you, Justin. Zeke, what do you think about that? I mean, I don't know that I'd want to go visit a country that made me put an ankle monitor on, but
Yeah, I have never heard that, right? So the proposal catches me a little bit off guard. I would say that one, our tourist system is not our immigration system, right? We don't think of tourism as immigration. But yeah, I think that would have all kinds of constitutional challenges, right? Because our Constitution does grant rights to anyone who is on American soil, even if they're, visiting or on temporary visits. Now, can we do better to ensure that people are following the law? I think I generally think that's a good principle that we can agree on. I don't know about the ankle monitor, though.
Yeah. Let's go to Yara, who's in Madison, Wisconsin. Hi, Yara. What do you think? Yara?
Hi.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm right here. Yes, I was thinking along the lines of the barriers that there are in immigration. I mean, speaking for myself and for many people who I know who went through the process, it is really something with so many hoops and so many challenges that I think that a lot of people who are perfectly qualified and that would be incredible American citizens just get lost in the weeds, and as a result of all those barriers kind of fall through the cracks.
So what would you do about it?
I think that one of the things that I would propose, I mean, at least in this current administration, is reducing the requirements and kind of making that process more expedited and clear. I mean, community outreach has been a huge part of my journey towards becoming a citizen, and like having people in communities that can help navigate that process is a huge thing that I think should be implemented all around.
Yeah, Yara, thank you very much. Alicia, I will say, whenever we do a story, whenever I've done a story about immigrants, there is always the group that helps assimilate people in any community in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to find church groups, other social network groups that just, go out of their way to help people assimilate. We've seen that with the Uniting for Ukraine program, which was basically a humanitarian sponsorship. If you could find somebody in the United States who would sponsor you and vouch for your finances, if you will, that they would take care of you and help you get settled, you could come to the United States under this humanitarian program. Biden administration expanded that to Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, and Venezuela. And many of the numbers of people from those countries crossing the border illicitly dropped. And the Biden administration would tell you, hey, this is how we do it. We create a legal pathway, and people won't go through the jungles and they won't take these treacherous routes. That's under fire right now from the Trump administration. But yeah, there's all kinds of red tape. It is complicated to become a resident. It's complicated to become a citizen.
And by the way, to become a citizen, Tolliver, you have to pass a civics test, which many native-born Americans might have a hard time with.
Yeah, me. Like when they asked who was president during World War I, Listeners were waiting. Who is president? Turns out it was Jay Leno. He actually had some fun with this back when he was hosting The Tonight Show.
What country did we fight in the Revolutionary War?
France.
What does the Emancipation Proclamation mean? What did it do?
The Emancipation Proclamation?
No, the Emancipation Proclamation. What did it do?
I don't know.
You've heard of it?
I have heard of it.
Freed the slaves.
It did. Yes, that's what it did.
That's what it is. By the way, the answer to that World War I question was Woodrow Wilson, not Jay Leno.
Oh, not Jay Leno. Okay, shocking.
But Tolliver, what are we listening to here?
This is Dua Lipa with Houdini.
All right.
Yeah. So Harry Houdini famously immigrated from Hungary to Wisconsin. I guess you could say he was hungry for cheese curds. More of your calls coming up on The Middle.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. In this hour, we're asking you what you would do to improve legal immigration in this country. You can call us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com. My guests are University of Pennsylvania professor Zeke Hernandez and Bloomberg immigration reporter Alicia Caldwell. And before we go back to the phones, Zeke, you, as we say, make the case that immigrants are net positive contributors to society. But one of the things we've seen in this country and in other countries around the world is that if too many come in too fast, there is a political backlash. How do you find the right balance, the right pace, the right mix of immigrants to come into a country like the United States?
Yeah, I mean, look, anyone who tells you what the right rate or the right number is lying to you, right? The truth is, we don't know for sure. But I think it's useful to separate immigrants and what they do, and in fact that they do a lot of good. But also, what's interesting when you look at the data is that people like immigrants, right? When they talk about their immigrant neighbors, the people that they are exposed to, they like them. They're not threatened by them. And then most of what's wrong is the immigration system, which is what we're talking about. And so a lot of it happens when too many immigrants arrive to one flashpoint, right? Which is usually a system problem, or when we don't have a way to kind of distribute them kind of more evenly, so to speak. And a lot of that is less about immigration, but it's a lot about things like how we build infrastructure. So it turns out that like the housing crisis and the problem of building infrastructure we have is not independent of people's opinions about immigration, right? If people feel like it's crowded, they're upset, but it's not really about immigrants. It's just about the crowding. And so I would say a lot of it has to do with that, how we build infrastructure, housing, those kinds of things, rather than the foreign people themselves, if that makes sense.
Well, and as you said, the last time we had real immigration reform was decades ago. And if you look back to the immigration reform bill in the 1980s, which offered amnesty to the people by Ronald Reagan, offered amnesty to the people who were in the country illegally. In the 1980s, this country had something like 200 million people living in it, and now we're at 330. You think we've brought our infrastructure up to the levels to deal with that kind of number now? Alicia, do you think that there is a world in which there's bipartisan support during this Trump presidency for a overhaul of the immigration system that includes the legal immigration system?
The short answer is no. Everybody's really, really entrenched. The longer answer is there could be some wiggle room depending on what is offered, right? So a lot of the argument has been for 40 odd years, hey, we gave you amnesty in 1986, you promised enforcement, you never gave it to us. And so subsequent to 1986, and that was an effort that started under the Carter administration, what you saw is a real push on enforcement only. Enforcement now and generosity later. And I think that remains the case. And obviously the voting public, this was a huge issue in November. People, I've spoken to a lot of people, immigration supporters from border communities like El Paso, Texas, who said the community got fed up. There were, thousands of people outside a church in downtown El Paso at one point for, days, weeks on end, it seemed like, and it was a constant concern. New York, Chicago, Denver saw these inflows, not necessarily natural inflows, right? Because of Texas busing systems and sort of political machinations that moved folks to various communities. But right now, I don't see a path in Congress because of the entrenchment. I can see, I don't see a gang of 8 for those who are unfortunate to remember that period.
Tolliver.
Yeah, so Maurice in Minnesota brings up an interesting point. Says immigration increases competition for existing citizens and lowers wages. I was wondering if we could talk about that. And also another person commented that it's not going to be immigration that lowers wages, it's going to be automation. So maybe Zeke, we can talk to you about that. What are your thoughts on those comments?
Yeah, again, I just, to me, it's a bit dismaying how that is such a common belief because the evidence so clearly, debunks that, right? For immigration to lower wages, what has to be true is that immigrants arrive, they work, they sit on their butts and don't spend their paychecks, right? And the economy doesn't grow. It would also have to be true that immigrants don't start businesses, that they don't pay tax, that they don't contribute anything other than just competing for a job. That is not what happens. Also, immigrants don't want the same jobs as native workers. And even if they work for the same firm or in the same industry, they do different things. For example, immigrants do things that don't require language proficiency. And someone, so you look at your restaurant, what are immigrants doing? What are US born people doing? That shows you kind of the division of labor. So for all those reasons, you end up not having these kinds of like wage reduction things that happen. I think if we understood that immigrants are not competing with natives in the labor force, but they complement them, then all of these other conversations we're having would be much easier because the premise isn't a zero-sum premise. The premise is there's an abundance and a win-win, which is actually what the evidence shows, right? It's not just a wishful thinking thing.
Let's get to some calls. Jerome is in Fort Worth, Texas. Jerome, what do you think about this?
Hey there. So coming from working 14 years in landscaping and home renovation, I worked rather closely with migrant workers, even undocumented people, and I've always been quite confused of why we don't make the process to come here and work legally easier in order to deter migration. So if you make the system to where the cost is reasonable for people who are coming here from low-wage countries, the application and processing is the real cost to process that. And then from there, there's less incentive to cross the border, risk deportation, and so on and so forth. And then when they are here legally, they're paying their taxes and to touch on previously mentioned the lower wages, they actually are here legally and they are able to fight for the right to not be underpaid and not potentially drive down those wages when they don't have that leverage when they're here undocumented to file those complaints to the labor board.
Jerome, can I just ask you one quick follow-up question? Are you noticing any difference with your workers right now, given the crackdown that's going on illegal immigration? Are people showing up to work?
I actually did transition over to nursing a few years ago, so it has been a couple years since. But even on the tail end of the previous Trump administration, I did hear either firsthand or because a lot of the migrant workers in the areas, they tend to all communicate. It did become a little bit harder to actually fill the positions, not from so much of a really it was just hard to find anybody to fill those jobs because they are hard work. And unfortunately, it was honestly tough to find a lot of citizens that were willing to take it for the wage provided.
Well, thank you so much for calling. Let me get to one other one. Ruben in Pennsylvania. Ruben, welcome to The Middle. Go ahead with your thoughts.
Hi. I think this topic was already hit on, but I want to kind of expand on it about how difficult it has been made for legal immigrants to stay in the country. Just based on the country you were born in, you might be waiting in line 10, 15, 20 years where your legally born child who was born outside the country but came in as a dependent migrant with you just gets aged out. So say a kid who came at 2 years old who was legally in the country, but just because of the country he was born in or his parents were born in, would have to wait 18 years, 20 years. And at 18 years, he has to make a decision of getting into the same cycle of getting a visa or going back to a country which he doesn't know anything about because he or her has spent all of their life here in the U.S. So there's a lot of brain drain that's happening because people are worried of the archaic system that it is. And since it's country-based and their idea probably was that they don't want one country or a few country people to have a lot, to come in big chunks, but still the system is so old, so archaic in that sense, where the people can't just come in, and people who are coming in legally are then forced to do things like find another university, even if they're
Right.
they have a legal visa, but their H-1B didn't get picked up, so they find a university, do a fake another master's degree, do a CPT day one, just to stay in the country because they've
Yeah.
spent a lot of money trying to come here.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of those things.
Yeah, Ruben, we've got it. Thank you very much for that. And Alicia, it makes me wonder how much pressure is coming from the business community right now to try to streamline things, because of those last two callers we just heard make the case that there's a brain drain because it takes so long, it's so difficult for people, and also, in many cases, it's just hard to find workers to do things unless you're dealing with an immigrant labor force that is dynamic and is coming in.
Right. I think there's a couple things at play. So tech and sort of your white collar industry are pushing through various organizations for more H-1Bs, a better H-1B system. On the other side, on sort of a temporary worker program, the H-2A, which is agriculture, and an H-2B, which is seasonal non-agriculture, those were really aimed at Latin America. They're aimed, there's some student visas in there too and some travel. But that doesn't address necessarily countries that aren't historically migrant countries, which is one of the big issues we've seen in the last couple of years, right? Venezuela is historically not a migrant country to the US. If people migrate, they migrate to countries around South America. People from all over the world have been coming in the last several years. So it's hard to know if an expansion of an H-2A or H-2B would help stem that, or if it's a combination of H-2A and B expanding and offering sort of more options, and then reforms in the asylum system as well, if that combo would do it. But for sure, H-2A and H-2B are programs that business are clamoring for. Agriculture is a big industry, right? But farm workers and cattlemen are not in the same category. Dairy farmers don't get H-2As. So you have to sort of maneuver through the system and find the right path. And everybody's clamoring for more, and they want workers. States have said, we need temporary programs, help us bring people in, help us, screen them, and so on and so forth.
I was shocked when I was getting ready for this show to discover the amount of letters of visas that there are. There's way more than just H-2Bs and H-2As and all of those. Let's go to Robert in Atlanta, Georgia. Hi, Robert. Welcome to The Middle. Go ahead with your thoughts. Oh, lost Robert. Okay, well, we'll try Travis in Laramie, Wyoming then. Travis, go ahead with your thoughts.
We're a nation of immigrants. All of my friends, most of which are very conservative, really agree with legal immigration. We need more legal immigration. The process needs to be simpler and more effective. We need to be able to, it sounds a little rough, but weed out the people that we want and need versus the people that maybe aren't ready yet, and just make the process efficient.
And do you have any idea of how you would do that, Travis?
The bureaucracy is so embedded and so strong. Each one of the simple steps takes months and sometimes years. So just making those processes more efficient, getting rid of some of the red tape, and then, it shouldn't be that difficult in theory.
Yeah, Travis, thank you very much. Zeke, do you have any thoughts on how that could be made more efficient? Get rid of some of the red tape, as he says?
So many of them. I think, look, here's one that creates these interminable lines that are inefficient. In 1990, the last time we reformed the system, we decided that no single country could account for more than 7% of green cards, right? The problem is that when you have like Indian, Chinese, Filipino, Mexican, there's huge lines for them, right? Because there's millions and millions of them waiting to come in versus, say, someone from a little country like I don't know, like Chile, right? The line is very short for Chileans. So it's very weird, right, that this 7% quota that we haven't changed for 35 years creates these interminable lines so that someone from India literally has to wait 195 years to get their green card, right? Which is an absolutely insane number. So that would be a very easy one to eliminate. The other is just increasing the quotas on the number of visas we allow, right? When you only have 85,000 H-1Bs or 66,000 H-2Bs, and firms are demanding double, triple, quadruple that number, what happens then is you have a lot of bureaucracy in terms of how that's allocated, right? And we have these inefficient lotteries. And so it's weird that we allocate visas literally based on a roll of the dice. Like we determine which firms get workers by a roll of the dice, and then with no sense of who needs them more than the others. So I think, yeah, eliminating those quotas by country, the country quota, increasing the numbers that we allow, and then increasing the diversity of pathways, because like you said, you know, a dairy farmer has a totally different path than like a fruit picker, even though they're doing very equivalent work, right? So that's what I mean.
Joe is calling from Boston, Massachusetts. Hi, Joe. Welcome to the middle. Go ahead with your thoughts.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to comment on a statement that was made by one of your guests regarding statistics. And depending on who's putting out the statistics, they can be made to read whatever it is that the maker wants them to read. The fact of the matter is that a huge swath of the construction industry and the restaurant industry, both industries which I have worked in most of my life, have been taken over by immigrants. That is just a fact. If you walk in any restaurant, you will see nothing but immigrants working there. If you go on a construction site, in the 90s, early 2000, cranes used to have to take sheetrock and move them up to different levels of the building. Now they have immigrants carry them up on their backs for cheaper labor. So they are absolutely taking Americans' job because they pay them less, and they can hold them to lower standards because they know they don't have any rights. So all of these stats that people are coming up with and putting out, this is why people are upset.
So would you restrict the number of legal immigrants who will be allowed into this country, Joe?
I would not. I am not against immigration. I am against illegal immigration because that absolutely drives down wages. I am not saying that no one should be allowed to come in, but when you have illegal immigration, companies take advantage of that absolutely, and they pay them less.
Okay, Joe, thank you for calling, and we're running out of time here. But Zeke, let me let you respond to that with this. I mean, just it brings up a very important point. You can't just talk about legal immigration because for many they say, well, the issue is this illegal immigration, and they merge them together.
Yeah, I mean, they do, right? The truth is, first of all, on the statistics point, there's a difference between peer-reviewed evidence and stuff that like someone with a partisan interest puts out. I'm talking about the peer-reviewed evidence. The truth is, like, a lot of the jobs that undocumented immigrants are doing are jobs that Americans will not do. I spend a lot of time talking to people in the very same industries that were just mentioned, and they prefer to hire native-born people. It's just easier because they speak the language, and for a lot of the other reasons, they just cannot find the workers. And so, again, if we increase the pathways that are legal, those undocumented pathways will not be necessary.
Well, that is the time that we have this hour. I want to thank my guest, Zeke Hernandez, a professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and author of the book, The Truth About Immigration, and Bloomberg immigration reporter, Alicia Caldwell. Thanks so much to both of you.
Thanks for having me.
And don't forget, The Middle is available as a podcast in partnership with iHeart Podcasts on the iHeart app or wherever you listen to podcasts. And coming to your feed next week, an episode of our weekly podcast extra, One Thing Trump Did, featuring CNN chief media analyst Brian Stelter on Trump's fights with the press. And next week, we'll be right back here as we approach the first 100 days of Trump's second presidency. We want to know what you think so far.
Oh, this is going to be like a 3-hour show, right?
We'll see.
As always, you can call in at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com. Or you can also sign up for our free weekly newsletter and find the sexiest middle t-shirts and mugs. Oh, my God. I got to stop saying
gosh. That. Well, thanks so much to our satellite radio listeners, our podcast audience, and the more than 420 public radio stations making it possible for people across the country to listen to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I will talk to you next week.